Welcome to Professor Burkett's lesson on classical citation in Chicago style according to Turabian 8th edition. This is a lesson on documenting sources in the humanities with parenthetical citation. Or why is citation important? Well, what is at stake is the ethics of scholarship as a matter of reference to sources and due to intellectual property rights in publishing law. And three principles here. Writers owe authors proper reference when they make use of their ideas and words. Writers owe readers an acknowledgement of sources and voices in their writing, for instance, when the writer's voice ends and another author's voice begins. Writers owe themselves a record of their sources for future reference. Citation makes writers look good, informed, ethical, and careful with details. So there's no good reason not to cite sources, but every reason to do so. A safe rule to remember: when in doubt, cite it. Chicago style refers to conventions of writing, style, citation, and formatting the document outlined in three authoritative reference books. The University of Chicago Press editorial staff publishes the Chicago Manual of Style, currently in the 16th edition. The Turabian team publishes a Manual for Writers, currently in the 8th edition. And the Society for Biblical Literature publishes the SBL Handbook of Style, which simply applies Chicago style to the details of advanced biblical studies. And each of these three reference works has an accompanying website that you could refer to. Well, Chicago style has two systems of citation. The note or footnote style citation is used by writers in humanities, and this is outlined in the Manual for Writers, chapters 16 through 17. Parenthetical citation is used in the sciences and social sciences, and that is outlined in chapters 18 through 19. Classical citation refers to parenthetical citation of classical sources, citation formed similarly to MLA's styles guidelines for citing classical sources. In the humanities, writers use footnote citation, but also parenthetical citation for classical and other literary sources that have their own internal reference numbering systems, like chapter and verse, or book, section, and line number. By historical convention, then, writers use parenthetical citation for sacred, classical, medieval, and early English sources, as well as poems and plays. But writers in the humanities generally call this classical citation to distinguish it from the normal parenthetical system of citation that's available in Chicago style. Well, Turabian section 19.5 outlines classical citation in historical conventions that predate Chicago style, that go back many, many years, many centuries. As an example of classical style applied to the Bible, Paul explains that Christians have been crucified with Christ, meaning one's old self has died so that the new self might walk in newness of life. And then the citation, book, chapter, and verse, and an abbreviation of the Bible version, and the punctuation, the period, goes on the right side of the citation. Guidelines for classical citation. Classical, medieval, and early English literary works should usually be cited only in parenthetical citations. If the author's name and the title are not already mentioned in your surrounding text, include them, along with the section number upon first reference in your written essay. If subsequent citations clearly refer to the same work, list only the section number. Also, use no punctuation between the title of a work and a line or section number. Numerical divisions are separated by periods without spaces. So writers abbreviate the names of authors and works according to disciplinary conventions when they reference them in classical citation. For classical works, refer to the Oxford Classical Dictionary for abbreviations, And for biblical works, refer to the SBL Handbook of Style. So for classical sources, it is inappropriate and simply unhelpful to cite page numbers, because these sources have been translated and are in so many different versions. As an example, St. Augustine commences his Confessions by pinpointing the psychological state of humanity. For you, O Lord, have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it finds rest in you, with the parenthetical citation from the Confessions, and the numbers referring to Book 1, Section 1, Paragraph 1. This page shows some examples of classical citation for various kinds of works. Plato's Symposium, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and these all have some abbreviations which you can use or not use. Eusebius, Church History, and each of these citation systems has a history of its own. For instance, for Plato, the citation numbers come from a Renaissance edition, and there's 216 refers to a column number, a page and column number, and the E to a section number. For Aristotle's works, the numbers refer to Thomas Aquinas, his edition, as well as the Berlin edition of the complete works of Aristotle. Well, medieval and Renaissance works, Dante's Inferno refers to the canto or song or book number, as well as the line number, and that can be abbreviated as INF. Amelia Lanier, in one of her poems, is cited by the name of the poem along with the line number. Early English literary works like Shakespeare, you can include in parenthetical citation the name or the abbreviated name of Shakespeare's play, and the numbers refer to the act, scene, and line numbers. With Paradise Lost, you include the name of the work, Paradise Lost, followed by the number referring to the work and the line numbers. Writers generally introduce abbreviations in parentheses immediately after the first use of the work's full title. But once it's established that the numerical location numbers refer to a particular work, you can drop the name of the work from the parenthetical citation, since that information is obvious and given. Well, poems and plays. Writers in the humanities use parenthetical citation for classical and contemporary poems and plays. If you run 2 or more lines of poetry into your text, separate them with a slash, with a space before and after it. In most cases, however, use block quotations for more than 2 lines of poetry, according to Manual of Writers. And here are some examples with a quotation, and the quotation integrated into my own sentence, and the citation. For poems, Homer introduces the epic hero's cunning intelligence. Tell me, O Muse, of the man of many devices, from the Odyssey, Book 1, Line 1. Anna Barbald writes, there walks a spirit over the peopled earth, secret his progress is, unknown his birth, in her poem 1811, lines 215 through 16. Well, Alfred Lord Tennyson illustrates naturalism in his famous expression, nature red in tooth and claw, in his long poem Memoriam, referring to section 56, line 15. Well, Ezra Pound, the modernist poet, produces a strong Anglo-Saxon Jesus. A son of God was the goodly fair, that bade his brothers be, he writes, in Ballad of the Goodly Fair, lines 33 through 34. And for plays, as an example from Shakespeare, if music be the food of love, play on, from the first line of Twelfth Night, Act 1, Scene 1, Line 1. Christopher Marlowe, in his play, writes, "All places shall be hell that is not heaven," in Dr. Faustus, Act 1, Scene 1, line 131. So these are some examples, and you can follow the principles. The Bible. Writers cite the Bible in parenthetical citations following the conventions of classical citation. According to the Turabian manual, for citations from the Bible include the abbreviated name of the book, the chapter number, and the verse number, never a page number. Depending on the context, you may use either traditional or shorter abbreviations for the names of the books. And see the chapter on abbreviations in the Turabian manual, chapter 24, section 6. Further, use Arabic, not Roman numerals, for chapter and verse numbers, with a colon between them, and for numbered books, such as the following examples. The first time one cites the Bible, one should include in parenthetical citations the book number, the chapter and verse numbers, and in brackets an abbreviated name of the version that you happen to be quoting. So thereafter, you can leave the abbreviation of the Bible version out, but it should always be clear to the reader what version of the Bible you happen to be quoting. So once it is clear to the reader that you are focusing on a particular book or passage, you may abbreviate even more to avoid redundancy, and see chapter 24, section 7 for abbreviations and citations. Also note, writers use abbreviations only in citations, not in the prose of their sentences. So once it is clear that you happen to be focusing on, say, Psalm 23, you can just include the chapter and verse, or even just the verse numbers as the below examples illustrate. Placement in the text. Writers place the parenthetical citation not at the end of the reference, whether it's a quotation, paraphrase, or summary, but at the end of the clause or sentence. According to a manual for writers, normally the parenthetical citation should be placed at the end of the sentence or clause containing the quotation or other material. Further, the closing parentheses precedes a comma, period, or other punctuation mark when the quotation is run into the text. Moreover, if you cite several sources to make a single point, group them into a single parenthetical citation called a compound citation and record the reference in the order you quoted the sources, separated by a semicolon. And here's an example. Paul declares that Christians can expect no condemnation by God and no separation from God, but can expect to live together with Him. And you see the compound classical style citation between the closing quotation marks at the end of the sentence, and the period comes at the very end. Bible abbreviations. Writers spell out titles of biblical books or other books in the prose of their paragraphs, but for citation information, they use standard abbreviations according to the conventions of the discourse community. Well, Turabian lists the abbreviations of biblical books and some versions of the Bible in section 24.6. Most writers use the traditional Bible abbreviations, for example, GAL period for Galatians. But in advanced biblical studies, writers use shorter abbreviations or the same abbreviations without a period. And we'll see the SBL handbook, section 8.3 in a moment. When you cite biblical passages by verse, abbreviate the names of books using Arabic numerals if they are numbered. For example, 1 Kings. Also use Arabic numerals for chapter and verse with a colon between them, according to a manual for writers. And here's an example. King David asked the most important question, "Lord, who may dwell in your sanctuary?" And with the citation information on the right side of the sentence. Bible versions, many Bible versions. Well, because there are so many Bible versions, writers identify the version of the Bible they are quoting on the first occurrence by putting in brackets the standard abbreviation for the version of the Bible they are quoting, such as ESV, NAB, NIV, RSV, and so forth, placed after the location numbers in the citation. For subsequent references, writers do not identify the version except when quoting a different translation, so it's clear to the reader what version of the Bible the writer is quoting. So you can see chapter 24 for abbreviations and chapter 19, section 5.2 for guidelines and examples. Further, writers spell out the name of lesser-known versions, translations, and paraphrases of the Bible, if not already indicated in the writer's prose, and include a bibliography entry in the list of works cited for these works. If a writer makes his or her own translation, the writer simply adds a comma plus the phrase "my translation" or "translation mine." At the bottom are some examples of how this works. Well, SBL style. In advanced biblical studies, writers follow the conventions of the Society of Biblical Literature, which applies Chicago style to the many details of biblical studies in the work, the SBL Handbook of Style for Ancient Near Eastern, Biblical, and Early Christian Studies. The difference between Chicago style and SBL style is a matter of audience or discourse community. So, if one chooses to use SBL style, he or she should apply it consistently throughout the document or research essay. Here's some notes from the SBL handbook. When a biblical citation is in parentheses, a comma is not needed to separate the citation and the abbreviation of the translation. So this is a little bit different from Turabian or Chicago style. Further, abbreviations for the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, New Testament, Apocrypha, and Septuagint titles do not require a period and are not italicized. Again, this is distinct to SBL style, which tries to be a little bit more concise. Examples. Paul asks, "Do you not know that a little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough?" And there's the SBL style citation. Again, after their disobedience, the Lord God asked the first people 3 questions. Where are you? Who told you that you were naked? And what is this you have done? And again, the compound classical style citation according to SBL style. Works cited. Well, whatever somebody quotes and cites in their essay, the writer needs to include a standard bibliography reference in the list of works cited at the end of the essay. So in the humanities, a few sources are optional, not required in the list of works cited. Particularly, the Bible may be included or omitted from the bibliography. It's up to the writer. As well, standard reference works may be omitted. However, writers avoid such tertiary sources, that is, sources based on secondary sources, usually written for non-specialists, such as popular magazines, popular encyclopedias like Wikipedia, and common dictionaries like a Merriam-Webster dictionary, because these are considered non-scholarly, common knowledge, and does not add insight or new information to an essay that target readers would not already know. If you do include the Bible in your list of works cited, you can cite it just as the sample on this list of works cited with multiple versions of the Bible that I've included here. The Bible entry is formed as the Holy Bible, a colon, and then the version and publication information. And if you start with the Holy Bible, it is alphabetized under H. If you have a version of the Bible called the Message, of course, it is alphabetized under M. So this is a sample list of works cited if you do include the Bible in your list of works cited. A few words on quotations and quotation within quotation. When quoting dialogue or other quotations, writers use single quotation marks for the inner set of quoted words. Well, I'm going to refer to the Chicago Manual of Style, since that work has more detail on this point than a manual for writers. So quoted words, phrases, and sentences run into the text are enclosed in double quotation marks. Single quotation marks enclose quotations within quotations. Double marks, quotations within these, and so on. Well, the practice in the United Kingdom and elsewhere is often the reverse. Single marks are used first, and then double, and so on. And this can be confusing because in America we read works that are published here in the United States, in Canada, and in the United Kingdom and elsewhere, which reverse the practices as the Chicago Manual of Style indicates. Now, that manual provides a qualification to these rules. So, however, when the material quoted consists entirely of a quotation within a quotation, only one set of quotation marks need be employed, usually double quotation marks. Now, this applies all the time when we're quoting and referring to the Bible, especially Jesus' words, because Jesus didn't write himself, but we have his words from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and sometimes Paul. And so whenever we quote Jesus, we have a quotation within a quotation. Now, here are some examples. Matthew narrates his calling in short terms. Jesus saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he arose and followed him. And this quotation has a classical style citation on the right side of the sentence. So the words "follow me" I have put in red here just for emphasis so you can't miss it, is a quotation within a quotation. So it's in single quotation marks. Now, however, if I am quoting Jesus and no other words, for instance, from one of the gospel writers like John, then I don't need to put Jesus' words in double quotation plus single quotation marks. As an example, John summarizes the gospel by quoting Jesus. "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." So these are two examples that illustrate the principles that the Chicago Manual of Style specifies. A word on the literary present tense. When introducing and discussing sources, writers treat them as the present voices of witnesses, and thus use what is called the literary present tense. Diana Hacker, in Rules for Writers, explains, "Use the present tense when expressing general truths, when writing about literature, and when quoting, summarizing, or paraphrasing an author's views, using present tense verbs such as argues, asserts, believes, claims, observes, reports, suggests, and so forth to introduce and discuss sources." Also, it's important to choose interpretive verbs and avoid the word says, for says nothing. It doesn't interpret or help the reader understand the tone of the passage. So writers choose present tense verbs to indicate and interpret the tone of the author's voice in the original passage. As an example, tradition treats sources as the living voices of witnesses as far back as Moses and Jesus. Quote, "so that," inner quote, "every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses," unquote. Jesus quoting Moses. And you see the compound parenthetical citation. So in this view, the 9th commandment informs the ethics of scholarship, reference, quotation, and citation. Now, concerning characters, as a first principle of style, writers give agency to characters. According to a manual for writers, readers tend to judge a sentence to be readable when the subject of its verb names the main character. So, make the grammatical subject of your sentence a character, a personal subject like Paul, or a virtual subject like love, or grace, or providence. When quoting, summarizing, and paraphrasing classical works and biblical books, Avoid personifying and giving agency to the work itself. For instance, the Bible says, or the ethics claims. Instead, give the agency to the author for the sake of clarity and good style. And here are some examples. Solomon affirms that wisdom and knowledge are founded on the fear of the Lord. Again, King David suggests, okay, I'm not saying the Bible suggests, but King David suggests that creation signifies the Creator. The heavens declare, he writes, while Paul advances the same theme. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities have been clearly seen, proposing that the world holds a mysterious but open secret as a system of signs. And you see the classical citation at the end of the sentence. Again, Nehemiah commends the joy of the Lord is your strength, alluding to the psalm writer's experience and theme. And you see the compound classical citation at the end of the sentence. Finally, applications. I apply these principles every day when I write, and I think you will too. Refer to and cite classical sources in your class papers with Chicago style according to Turabian 8. And remember, what is at stake is clarity, style, and the writer's credibility. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to seeing you in class.